of commercial government, who effectively the local economy and the free market. Now, that's what I argue for. You might say in a secular fashion here at Nooga Radio, that we should have a local economy and a free market in Chattanooga and beyond, and that our prosperity is found in living out the promises of the gospel. Now, that's an argument that you hear at church if you go to church. It's made there, the promises of the gospel that require certain things of you. Here, the Lord in the red type in Matthew chapter 5, again, he says that you are the salt of the earth. And he says, well, if you're salty and you've lost your savor, you're not acting as a preservative, right? You're not good for anything but to be cast out and to be trodden underfoot of men. And what he's saying is that he's talking here about people who profess to believe him and who profess to love him, who count themselves among the children of Israel, right? Not just the DNA tribes, any member of the 12 tribes, but the spirit, having the spiritual DNA, if you will, by faith. That is to say, those recounted in the book of Hebrews, all those in the Old Testament times who lived by faith and not by sight. Ye are the light of the world. A city that is set on a hill cannot be hid. And so those two verses are given a kind of short treatment by a lot of Christian people who want to have an excuse to compromise with commercial government. They want to compromise with the way the world is today, and who see what is as normative. And that simply can't be, that's really untenable, especially if you have a personal God who is looking at you every day and from whom you can't hide anything, and whose complaint against mankind is very particular in the 66 books of the Bible, and whose solution to the sin problem, whose answers for man's fall is also are also spelled out there and taught from the pulpit, right? The pulpit of all faithful churches teach all the arguments made by God against man and his sin, and for man in his redemption, for man who is to obey God in the particulars. Those particulars, you could say, summarized in the Ten Commandments, which are the basis of equity, the rule of life, Christians say, right? We're going here by what Christians say. And they know the danger of being salt without savor. And yet, I'm afraid, because we're Americans and because we're used to things that are familiar, and we are unwilling to cause abrupt changes in our own lives and among our friends and even our relatives, we don't act according to principle, or perhaps according to conviction. And so the question that people such as Ray Moore of Exodus Mandate ask is, why are we supporting the cartel? Why are we patronizing, even gladly, even with our full enthusiasm, the public school? And it is a very large system. The public school system in Hamilton County is a great business operation. Its assets are about $250 million, and the budget is about $400 million. There's a good bit of bonded debt behind it, and it has in its care and embrace 43,000 students, and they're served by and overseen by about 5,000 or 6,000 employees of county government in the school department. And here I'm asking questions about it. I'm asking, why are people who make a profession to love the Lord Jesus on Sunday, on Monday, accepting of the free service? It is free in a way. It's not really free. Half of your taxes to county government go there. Your transaction taxes, which are collected by the city and the county, go to maintenance of that system. And you're not offended by that. And you're not offended by that. And you are perhaps, if you're a professing Christian, acting inconsistently. So that's what I want to ask you about. Why are we here patronizing something that we don't believe in? Or do we? Or do we really believe in what the state has to offer? Do we think that the state has a duty and an obligation to hire people, total strangers, and to have the care of our children for many hours a day? And of course, if you have, it may not just be one, it may be several. If you're in the high school, your child changes classes 5 or 6 times, so there are 5 or 6 different employees, each with a specific area of academic expertise. And so your student is in that person's charge for 55 minutes, then the bell rings, boing, and out he goes. There's 5 minutes between, and then suddenly the next subject is taken up. And I wonder, you know, I've thought a lot about this question and read a fair amount in educational literature and history, and I'm just wondering about one of the main points that the critics of schooling per se make, and that is that the agenda and the curriculum of schooling is schooling. It's not really math or science or history or civics, as they call it, or biology. It is schooling itself. That is a curriculum, and it doesn't really matter what is taught. It doesn't matter whether it's true or false. It doesn't matter whether it's good or bad, or whether it's interesting, holds the students' attention, benefits the students. Schooling is the agenda. That is the curriculum. That's the statement made by John Taylor Gatto, the teacher of the year of New York City and New York State for several years in running before he was fired. He was forced out when actually resigned. He was being forced out because he was the guerrilla teacher in the worst schools in the worst district. Well, in the worst schools of a district in New York City. That's his assessment. What you get in schooling is schooling itself. And there is something there that's very important that's not in view, but you can see it in the view of writers such as Spinoza, who was writing in the 1500s, and some of the German philosophers as well, Fichte, and others who, as I've read about them, they really wanted to take from the individual the thing that made the individual dangerous, and that is his individuality and his private genius. Schooling is about crippling people so that they can become compliant and useful. They can be useful in the factories. They can be useful in armies. They can take orders. They can be employees. They can be subjects of governments and national states. They can be applicants for welfare benefits and people who are brought into service to pay taxes and the like. That is what the philosophers, including John Dewey and many of the behaviorist scientists and philosophers in the late 19th century and early 20th century, that's what they believed. And the elites, if you read The Descent of Man by Charles Darwin, the elites have to take charge of evolution. And that is to say, if we don't control evolution of the few so that they can continually improve, there will be a descent of man, right? That's what the descent of man is all about. We have to control evolutionary development, and that's of course done by the managerial elite. And that line of thinking in his book, that was The Evolution of Species, came out in 1849, and this other volume, which was really very influential among the intelligentsia, came out in the 1870s. And there they saw their calling to control the masses, control common people. An argument that fits very well with Marxism, by the way. And here I am, David Tulis, asking about local economy, asking about free market. And don't we want to have a local economy, a free market? Why don't we have a local school system? Why don't we have one that's genuinely local instead of one that's merely a satellite of Nashville, which is a satellite of Washington? And it's not because Tennessee is not potentially politically independent and potentially economically independent. It could be if there were men of character and real solid sense of identification and belonging. You could perhaps have independence politically and some even economically, but we don't have that. We are extensions and vassals in many ways of the national economy system, which of course is part of that is national government. That the government in Washington and all those hangers-on, all those academicians, those think tanks, those policy groups, those supported by giant fellowships, giant donations from the great wealthy ones, again, who want people to be consumers. That's what we have to be, as consumers and borrowers. That's how they make their livings. That's how they keep us contented in our place as the proletariat, and as consumers and borrowers. That's the main goal. And I think in opposition to this, we should look at people such as a gentleman described by Yolanda Putman in the Times Free Press in a recent edition of the newspaper. His name is Herbert Book McCrae, and he's a former teacher and a former principal. He's the father of 3 grown children in their 30s and 40s. And as the story says, he's been a father figure to many people. Now, he's involved in extensive personal relationships in a charitable context. And his work, as he sees it, is to encourage young people who might be drawn into affiliation with gangs and street clubs to have them have a higher view. And so he's always talking about college. He's talking a lot about education, about schooling, about his young friends making the most of schooling. Now, that's certainly possible to do, and it is the personal argument that often wins the day against the intellectual argument against state-run, state-controlled schooling. And it's this: well, I know a teacher in that school, and she's a godly woman, or I know a man in that teacher. He's a great Sunday in that school, and he's a great Sunday school teacher, and is a devout Christian. Or this teacher's gone for the semester because he's on a mission trip. So we know that our school is okay because that person is there. And so we have a kind of salvation of the system by the human examples, by the individual examples, such as Herbert McCrae, who is 63 years old and is a mentor. And Yolanda, in her lead, says that he has mentored youth all his life and has no plans to stop. And the story is part of the story is set in a park. And there's a boy named Lisandro Gonzalez, 13 years old, and he's reciting 1 Corinthians 13:11. And that verse, Lisandro recites, says, "When I was a child, I spoke as a child. I understood as a child. I thought as a child. But when I became a man, I put childish things away." And that is what I think is very difficult if you are a patron of the public school, because childishness is extended by about 5 to 7 years. You're kept a child until you're 18, until you graduate. Childhood really ends at about age 13 or 14. And yet, because we live in a system that has extended it scientifically, as it were, we don't view such young men as Lisandro as men. Though in our American history, we can think of many people who were children who began businesses, who commandeered frigates, and who served in the military at very young ages. Herbert McCrae is part of Boys to Men male mentoring model, and he's been doing that since 1993. Now, here we have the example of local economy in the free market. Though he's taking money from a national program called My Brother's Keeper, his intentions don't seem to be too badly dissuaded from their goal by that. His goal, Yolanda says in her report on the newspaper, is to teach interviewing and job readiness skills to youth 12 to 15. They learn soft skills needed to get and keep a job, as well as key money management. McCrae came to Chattanooga in 1973, and he says, "Baseball saved me, and there were men in the community who cared. There were people who made sure we had college on our radar. We had folks to say the world could be your oyster, but you need guidance. Our organization is in place to be that guidance." This exactly is right. Personal interest and personal care. And I know there's a lack of desire for this, because I've had the hardest time getting apprentices for my business. I'm in business. I'm a capitalist and entrepreneur. And though even among homeschoolers, there's a kind of sclerosis of the heart, a sclerosis of the mind, that keeps people from seeing someone like me as a mentor, someone who can teach you the basics of law, public policy, government, media. These are all the kinds of things that I teach. And yet it's very difficult to find someone to want to learn these things. We had from UTC recently one person to come for discussion about an internship, and that young man went rather than being in an overheated radio news environment, he elected to have his internship with a nonprofit organization. And I'm sure there's some good reasons for that. And I don't want to misrepresent what could be his story. But who would not want to be involved in a media outlet or genuine official media outlet such as Nooga Radio, that has connected with it, the website, Nooganomics.com, the website for the man who matters. Why do we not have people who want to work with adults? Where are families who say, my son needs to learn this business, and could he not learn that business here or there? Maybe with David Tulis. Work with David Tulis, help him with open records requests, help him get his act together, and contact his prospective guests and the like. There are all kinds of things that bring a man out of boyhood. But if you're in school, those things are kept from view. And even in the homeschool sector, which is non-schooling or unschooling or private education, even there we have the schooling model keeping down this sort of search for individual genius among young people. Every individual child has his own genius. The best humanists make that case, though there are other humanists who argue against the searching and the finding of that individual gift and talent. And those are the philosophers who brought us public education to begin with. They view the individual as disruptive and non-compliant. We can't have people like that. We can't have people telling their own stories, following their own dreams, and dictating their own storylines that may contradict those of other people, right? That may contradict the system itself. And so we have public school, and I think Herbert McCrae is exactly right. We need to have mentors. We need to have relationships that are not part of the school culture. And I think we can make these contacts, helping the young, pouring down social capital, and helping people reach up and attaining social capital on their part. It's a great idea, and there are private means, I think, available for education. Education could be free. There just has to be on the part of parents a desire to not be subjugated to the state. The problem that you and I face is that most parents don't view that as a subjugation. They just view that as a relationship and a service. They don't have any sense of the religious argument being made against them and being made against their independence and their own prosperity. It is an implicit, though silent, argument, and it is a daily operation. And people don't realize that the state is their enemy. What is their friend? Well, the friend, I would say, is God. And I would say that to Christian families, the friend would be obeying what God says and not devolving family life to an institution. We are a culture of institutions anymore. We're hardly a culture of individualists. We're individuals and families. The family has been diminished. The family has been atomized, and individuals as well. Well, this is David Tulis. We're here at AM 1240 and FM 92.7. I do thank you for giving me just a minute of your time here. We argue for loving your neighbor and buying local. Near is better than far, and small than big, and simple than complex. And down in the footnotes, where even there, the good people will argue against us. They will fight against us. They will draw the sword against us in 5-point type. We argue back. Personal is better than corporate, and physical than abstract. I suggest you subscribe today to Nooganomics.com, the website for the man who matters. Not popular venue, but where I do my work as editor and writer with some guest writers. Do tune in, do subscribe. It's free. Nooganomics.com. That's Nooganomics.com. We're here at Nooga Radio, brought to you by Clay Whitaker at the Jim McCoon Law Firm. Clay Whitaker, the best attorney in town. I do thank you for giving me a couple of minutes of your time. I hope to see you tomorrow, 9 o'clock sharp. We're here every day. I thank you for the couple of minutes you've had for me, and we are here to have a great and prosperous view. Progress is to be had, and you are going to have it, Lord willing. David Tulis.